Very good. So kind of moving the talk along to what else I talk about in the books. In terms of ascertaining a specifically biological kind of genetic predisposition for not only beliefs themselves, but the particular similarities that we find across faith, that says to me that we can finally answer that question that I started out the conversation with of why. Why particular cultures around the world? Why particular people willing to give up traditional supernatural ideas in favor of secular values and ideas approaching religious non-belief? So if we're picturing that a particular kind of environment produced a particular kind of brain, that if the brain is working a little bit differently thereafter, even if I'm a firm believer that biology rules behavior, and I am, the environment still shapes biological fitness. So I believe that we can answer that question by looking at how different particular secular social groups around the world are now compared to the environments from which we came. And if we do that, look at some of the most secular communities around the world, the least religious, in terms of the cultures which haven't had it forced down on them from above, i.e. kind of Soviet Russia, kind of communist China. If we're looking at the people who have kind of ingratiated themselves with these values, we find that the kind of communities that they live in are very much not like the environments that we came from throughout most of our evolutionary history. These are social groups where instead of not being able to trust literally anyone you see, you can actually trust people who are around you, strangers that you've never met. Places like North America and in Western Europe and in Scandinavian countries, you can generally trust a predominant majority of the population. I'm not supposed to be living with this kind of brain in a situation where I can trust you or you or you. I've never met any of you people. We're not supposed to be living in that kind of situation where even if you can't trust other people and they wrong you, we're not supposed to be living in a kind of community where you can call the police and they will come and arrest the person who is being antisocial and not pro-social. Or even for another functional kind of social unit to have wronged you, like a business or something. With the kind of brains we have, we're not supposed to be in an environment where we can just call a team of lawyers to litigate those people back into Chapter 11. We're not supposed to be living in an environment where we mistakenly infer causation in the environment where none is present because we have such easy access to information to prove that that's not actually the case. Our brain is not set up to be in a situation where we can just jump onto Wikipedia or Google something in 2 seconds and find out that the stars move across the sky for other reasons other than what our elders are telling us. We're not supposed to live in a society that's relatively democratic and relatively safe insofar as even a baseline of survival is concerned. The brain coming from environments in which we needed to fight tooth and nail, hook and by crook for every aspect of human survival. We're not supposed to live in a situation where we can go and work some job, maybe even an easy job, and then take what we get from that job, go down to Sobeys and basically get the necessities of survival. We're not supposed to be in that kind of environment. So basically, I mean, that obviously led me to the realization of what is wrong with all these secular people because their brains are not functioning as they're supposed to be functioning. What is wrong with all of us? When you really look at what the brain was designed to believe in favor in terms of ideas, we are the weird ones, not the people who are believing in unforeseen forces of teleology and purpose. So, I'd also like to make something very clear, because I have said those things back and forth that kind of the social groups around the world where we find secular values and values that religious non-belief, or at least approaching them the most, seem to be the most socioeconomically developed and safe. Usually when I say that, if I don't have an addendum addressing that thought, usually right when I finish my talk, 10 hands shoot up and at least one person accuses me of being kind of a Neo-Hitchens or a Sam Harris, and talking about how religion is a scourge and a poison, about how we'll all be way better off when it's gone. That is not what I'm saying. In fact, you could almost imply that I'm saying precisely the opposite, where no matter what your system of beliefs tends to be, whether you're Christians or whether you're Muslims, whatever your system of beliefs tends to be, the more socioeconomically developed your social group becomes, the more technologically capable your social group becomes, the more intellectually developed, the more culturally developed, the more it seems you are statistically likely to drift towards secular values and away from the more conservative and supernatural belief systems that you're accustomed to. Now, I mean, Obviously, this is not to make light of any belief system or any part of the world that is not as socioeconomically developed as we are, but these are typically some of the places where we still find the most conservatively entrenched ideas imaginable and supernatural ideas, basically from our kind of cultural infancy at this point. In the Congo, for example, where genocide is happening right now, thousands of people are dying. These are parts of the world that are very unstable, where you can't trust the police. And even if you call the police and they show up, 50-50, they're going to help you or not. Where you can't trust anyone else around you, where you are not guaranteed an easy access to education. You're not guaranteed easy access even to the necessity of survival. Completely unlike our own society here in Canada, where even if you can't work, we'll give you the money so you can go out and get something to eat, right? These are parts of the world that are very unstable in these senses. And I mean, places like the Congo and in Uganda, where Christianity is still a majority religion over there, where witches are still feared, witches are still a menace in Christian Uganda. It doesn't seem to matter which kind of belief system you have. You can supernaturalize it if you do not have the kind of environmental safety to allow secularism to take root and kind of flourish. Now, if that part before, typically where I'm accused of some kind of neo-Hitchin, Sam Harris kind of argument, if that part's not the most contentious thing I say, the next part usually is, where I'm talking to people what my book is about, usually the next part is the most contentious. I believe that the world is getting better. I believe that the world is getting better along the line of a variety of different metrics. Basically, I believe any metric, almost any metric that we choose to measure, the world seems to be getting better. Now, I can understand for people who find that contentious, who don't really believe that. I find almost nobody believes that the world is getting better. Usually people find that the world's becoming worse over time. And I can understand that. I mean, if you were to turn on, say, CNN or Fox News or CP24, leaf through the, or nobody leaves through newspapers, but clicks through the New York Times and looks at news stories, what are you going to see? You're going to see ISIS, terror attacks all over the place. You're going to see the ravages, global ravages of climate change. You're going to see, if you're looking in the United States, all of a sudden you're going to see killer cops everywhere now. You're going to see stories of global financial ruin. It seems like if you pay attention to the news, the only guy in the world making any money nowadays is Elon Musk, right? So, I mean, these stories are not indicative of what the data actually tells us in terms of the growth of markets, in terms of the safety of societies. Right now, believe it or not, in the year 2017, if you were to be born into a random society anywhere on Earth, just roll the genetic dice and be born into anywhere, you are now statistically the most likely than at any other point in human history, going by the numbers, to be born in a social group which is not beset by violent conflict. You are the least likely at any point in history to die in violent conflict. You are the most likely at any point in history to be born into a relatively democratic society, into a social group which can relatively give you the necessities of basic survival. Now, I'm not the only researcher who's talking about the world possibly getting better. There's an excellent book, if I could recommend another one. There's an excellent book published just last year by, he would kill me if I got his nationality wrong, I want to study Swedish economist Johan Norberg, called Progress, in which he talks about the various kinds of socioeconomic matrix of the economy in terms of the power and competence of law enforcement, in terms of the powers of democracy, and in terms of your relative ability to afford, with whatever your currency is, a decent survival. All of those things seem to be going up year after year and decade after decade. And in fact, there was even a study published just last month. I really wish that I could have put it in the book. I'm trying to stay up to date on what my thesis is all about, because it's an author's worst nightmare to publish a book on something and then later have it easily refuted like a month later. You probably just want to pull it from the shelf and get on with your life. But there's a study published just last month that shows that ISIS attacks are the lowest they've been since the group even started. And not only that, but that terrorism attacks, your likelihood of dying in a terrorist attack is lower right now than in the 1970s. Fascinating. Even before that, another book written by cognitive science giant from MIT, Steven Pinker, wrote a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, why violence has declined, and basically talking about the gross data in terms of the likelihood, in terms of the percentage of a population for you being affected by violent crime or dying in violent conflict has gone down over time. So in terms of relating this back to what I talk about in the book, let's see, I've kind of been up here for a while. So in terms of talking about the future of faith, if we can look at the data and see that all of these kinds of socioeconomic, intellectual, cultural, kind of technological factors have been increasing year after year and decade after decade, it becomes to me less impossible that they could continue to kind of do so in the future. Now, yeah, there is a chapter in the book where I talk about how faith could function on an interpersonal level for random believers like you or me in not just a year from now, not just a decade from now, but possibly even, the opening of my last chapter, possibly even 100 years in the future, which often sounds kind of suspect to people, and I get it. Weather guys can't even predict a few hours into the future with much fidelity. What gives me the audacity to think I can predict years into the future for a complex human phenomenon like spiritual faith? Well, I suspect that many of you have probably read Richard Dawkins at one point or another and are probably familiar with his concept of Mount Improbable. In Dawkins' parlance, he's talking about the evolution of complex organs like the eye or the human respiratory system, where if you seem to take any of their interchangeable parts out, they seem to break down, and theists don't enjoy believing that that could have evolved naturally. Well, basically, he talks about how if you're looking at the problem like that, you're basically standing at the base of a mountain and looking up to the precipice and saying, that's an impossible peak. We could never make it there in a leap. Ideally, Dawkins writes that you usually want to look for a scaffold that's about halfway between you and the top. And then ideally, another scaffold between you and that one. And in terms of kind of gauging where I believe, given all of this other data in hand about kind of which social groups allow secularism to flourish and at least tolerance of religious non-belief to take root and kind of proceed from there, in terms of believing where those are most likely to catch on, I see that I predict that secularism, as a visible minority, will start behaving a lot like other visible minorities have, all throughout not just our history, but the history of being a minority anywhere on earth. For our particular kind of culture, that usually functions in legal battles, in rallies, in groups. And what we find, what has happened to other minority groups, the more a social group at large becomes ingratiated with people who are affiliated like that, the less likely anyone else is to hate those people, to find a reason to dislike those people for a reason that probably does not make sense anyway. It's a lot harder to dislike a group of people when you know someone at your office, or you know you have a friend, or maybe even a partner, or a brother-in-law, or something like that. So I see these kinds of movements growing even more than they are now, gaining more influence, more sway, and kind of to get to what I talk about with the title of post-secular. I see us approaching not just a more secular society, but what I envision as being post-secular. So I didn't come up with that phrase. Another series came up with it a number of years ago. And there's no real academic understanding of what exactly that means. What I personally take it to mean, having read all their literature, what I take it to mean is more or less a point in human history where we have moved beyond the theistic secular debate in terms of talking about how our social group functions and in terms of talking about how physical reality functions. If we're looking at the deep history of spiritual ideas, we see that every time a social group seems to understand more about physical reality, the supernaturalism fades, or at least becomes diminished in whatever their tradition happens to be. So to imagine that even if there is still stunning variance between the various ideas of different cultures on Earth in terms of where the universe comes from, the big questions, where the universe comes from, where people come from, why we're here, these values have been drifting more and more towards a commonly empirically identified center, obviously usually centering around the scientific method in terms of what we can empirically verify about physical reality. I have a part in my preface where I talk about how in the future, we probably will not even be as free as we are right now to believe in something like the Christian God. Now, I'm not talking about the oppression of rights or anything like that. I'm just talking that if I want to believe and what the Christian God actually is, which is a jealous, wrathful, interventionist, playing favorites, chosen people kind of God, I'm relatively free right now in this social group to believe in that. In terms of the future, where we've more or less approached a point where some of those ideas of anthropomorphizing our God, like people have done all throughout history, become just a little bit more silly. God talking generally become just a little bit more silly. We'll have moved past the point where I can potentially even invoke that spiritual idea. I cannot just randomly approach people and dredge from the past any old spiritual idea like Zeus, the sky and thunder god, and believe in him with a kind of religious fervor of people in the day, because all of us seem to agree, or at least the vast majority of us seem to agree, that that idea is rather silly. So it's off the table. In terms of all of the potential beliefs available to us, it's off the table. And if we're looking at the likelihood that people just agree on what we can empirically identify about physical reality to kind of believe in, it doesn't leave a lot of options left for us to supernaturalize. All we can really supernaturalize is things that we haven't empirically witnessed yet. So I basically talk about how eventually we'll reach this point of post-secularism. And as I believe I'm probably hitting like the hour mark here, to wrap it up with kind of a final thought, if we can look at the data in terms of improving social groups all over the world en masse, not everywhere obviously, I'm not saying that progress is happening everywhere, obviously very slow, very regressive in some parts of the world, but if we can believe that the world can continue to keep that trend going of improving our self-understanding and improving how our social groups function. Or even if we don't believe that, if we believe that the gains we've made in social groups where secularism seems to be possible, if we believe that we can extend those gains to a greater proportion of the human species, then that to me is a belief in the future of secularism. Okay, thank you.